If you've ever said these things about your tractor, it may be a sign that you need to rebuild your magneto. If you've said, my tractor starts up, it'll run good for 10 to 15 minutes, and then it quits. I go back an hour later and it starts again. Or maybe if you have a hand start tractor and you can crank and crank and crank and the tractor will never start. Those would be indications that you need to do some repair inside your magneto. So in this video, I'll walk you through all of the steps to do a magneto rebuild. Now it's important to know whether your tractor does have a magneto or a distributor, since many of the Farmall letter series tractors would be offered either way. This Farmall M behind me does have a magneto on it. You'll see that it's ground here, whereas a distributor would have power to it, which you can see here. Also, there's this coil that's external on the distributor, which is kind of the giveaway, but both do have wires coming out of them that go to the spark plugs, and they do look somewhat similar, which is why people would get them mixed up. So if you do have a magneto, then this video will help you, and even if you just want to order parts, it's important to know whether you have a distributor or a magneto because they won't interchange. Now this Farmall M has an International Harvester H4 magneto, and there's a small tag on the bottom here that starts out H4, which you can identify it that way. This type of magneto is common on all the letter series tractors like the A, B, and the H and the M, etc. There is a J4 magneto, which has the reverse spin on it, which would be only on a Farmall Cub. If you're working on a Farmall Cub, you could probably still follow along and learn a few tips along the way. If you're working on an H4, you'll definitely be able to follow along. So let's get started on that rebuild. Now before you take your magneto off of your tractor, you want to make sure that the timing is set so that when you put your magneto back on, your tractor will start up easily for you. So you want to trace where your number 1 cylinder is. Number 1 is always closest to the radiator. So you can trace that wire around and see that your number 1 cylinder is right here. Then you can take your cap off of your magneto. I did remove the battery cable off of the tractor so that we don't have any accidents here, and you'll want to do the same. Then you can set this cap aside, and you want your rotor to face where the number 1 was. So I have a rotor here that's off of the tractor so you can see this is the electrode, and that's what you want to point to where your number 1 wire was resting on the cap. So mine is not, it's over here, and you can spin it around and get it into the right position by using the hand crank on your tractor. So my dad's gonna crank it around, and when it cranks, you'll hear a snap right there. That was 1 snap for the impulse. He'll go, just stop right there. Okay, so you heard 1 snap for the impulse. If your tractor, when you spin it around, does not snap for that impulse, that would be an indication that inside your magneto here, your impulse spring is damaged. However, ours does snap. And so we heard it snap for the cylinder before, and then I had him stop before we got to the impulse for that number 1 fire. Therefore, it's at top dead center. So with that, we can set this aside, and then we can pull the magneto off of the tractor. There's 1 bolt here on the top, which will loosen up, and then there's also a bolt on the bottom. I just pulled the magneto off of the tractor. You can see the gaskets here on the end, and the impulse spring is inside there. I did remove my ground cable or connection here, and also I took the wires off, and I did number the order of the other 3 cylinders too, so I can make sure that I get them back together in the right order. Taking the cap off, and this will expose the coil on the top of the magneto here. Then we can spin around, and we'll just pull this rotor right off. Then there's 3 screws on the outside here, which we'll take off, and that will expose the points. Notice that we aren't taking out these center 2 screws, only these ones on the outside here. And maybe I gotta loosen this one up a little more. There's that one, and this one. And it's gonna come off hard for us. There we go. You want to remove this nut on the end. The easiest way is probably to use an impact wrench, but if you don't have an impact wrench, you could put a crescent wrench on the edge here to hold this in place, and then just use a socket on the end to loosen that up. Mine's loose, so I'm going to pull it off the rest of the way. And I'm going to set this aside. Looks like there's 2 washers underneath there, and then that will pull right out. There you go. You can see this spring inside there, just like we showed you earlier. I'm going to set that aside, I want to talk to you about the coil up here. Sometimes these coils will get really hot and melt, and they'll drip down in there so bad that the amateur won't move. Here I have an example of one that looks a little more melted than the one that I'm working on. If your coil is melted at all, then you definitely would want to replace it, or you can just replace it automatically since you're rebuilding your magneto, and might as well do it while you're in here. That's up to you. I'll take the screw off on each side. I'm going to flip it over and get the screw off. You can see that the wire here is connected, and it goes down here to where the points are. Pull that off, and then the coil will come out. There we go. Next, we want to take this condenser out, but first we need to remove this clamp that's on the end. When we reassemble, this clamp is very important as it grounds the condenser to the body of the magneto. So you definitely don't want to forget about this when you reassemble. I'm going to take that out and set it aside. See, that kind of loosens up. We also have the door on this side with the 2 screws, which I have ready to come off. And then our condenser will push through. I'm going to loosen up this nut on the end, which I loosened up first with a socket. I'm just going to go the rest of the way here with my fingers. I think I can, thought it was at the end of the threads. There we go. There's a little washer behind it. And then this will come out. You notice that there is that wire from the coil on the end. So we'll get that spade off of the end. Oops, it's kind of stuck on there. You try to get the wire off first, and then you can push the condenser the rest of the way. Nope. Let's see what it's stuck on. I think it's just hung up. There we go. Got the coil wire off. There we go. Okay, then your condenser will pull right out. Now we want to take our impulse dogs off of the end of the magneto. This is what we're looking at here, so you can see the underside of what we're going to reveal. So there's a couple different ways that you can pull the cover off of the end. One way would be to use a really small puller, like a 2 or 3 jaw puller that could get underneath there and pull it up. Of course, if you do that, you want to put your nut back on the end so that you protect your threads. If you don't have a small enough puller, then you could just use 2 screwdrivers and place them at opposite ends and apply pressure, and then hit it with a hammer until it comes loose. We had to hit it with a hammer a couple times before it came loose. And then you can take your nut off, and then this will come off. You can inspect that and see how it operates there. You can see that there's a lot of grease in here, which will definitely clean up very thoroughly before we put it back together. To pull the points out of your magneto, there's a small nut on the end down here, which you'll remove. And then there's also a screw here. I'll loosen that up, and it'll pull right out. There we go. Lift all that together, and then here's our points. Just gonna gently lift those up. Here it's loose, and you see this wedge is coming with it too on this side. There we go. Let's see if that lifts out. There we go. There's the wedge that you can see as well. You can take the 4 screws off of the end here, and then there's a key here, which you definitely don't want to forget about. I'm just going to pry that key out like so. Oops, there it is. You definitely want to take the key out. Don't forget about it. And then you can pry this apart, pull it out, just like that. We're going to take these screws off of the back cover and lift that off. You'll see this gasket here. Now you want to look in here, and you can see how worn this grease is and how much it's caked up. We're going to clean that out of there and repack it with new grease before we put this back together. So I'm going to set this grease aside and pull this gear out like that. And then might need to move a little bit more grease out of here before we pull that second gear out. We are going to clean this up very thoroughly before we put this all back together, and I'll show you how to retime these gears so that you get it back together properly. Oops. This grease is really dried up. It's kind of nasty. There we go. It moved from the bottom. There we go. There's that gear. And we'll get this cleaned up really thoroughly. Our back cover here is all cleaned up. We got that old grease out of there, so now we're ready to reassemble. I'll show you how to get it timed properly. On this smaller gear, you can look closely at the teeth around here and you'll see that one of them has a notch. My notch is right here and it's a really small notch. You've got to look closely for it, but you will be able to find it. That notch has to be lined up with this gear. You'll see on the top here that there's an R and an L for right and left. This magneto is right timed, so we have to take that notch and line it up directly in line with the R. Place it in there and then you can see that the notch is in the teeth directly beneath the R. So I'm going to add some high temperature grease around here. Just put a little, oops, not that much. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit around the teeth here just so that we don't set it in there dry. And then I'm going to look again, sorry, I'm going to look again at where my notch is, which is right here. I'm going to set it in there like so, and I'm going to get some more grease for the bottom of here and set that around there. Now I see that my notch is right there. Up here I'm going to look where my R is and drop that down right into place, just like that. There you can see that my notch is lined up with my R, and then I'm just going to fill in the rest of the cavity here with some grease. After that, we'll put that gasket and the cover back on, and we'll be ready to move on to our next step. You want to take a look at your bearings and inspect them. Also inspect the race and make sure that it's not pitted at all. If it is pitted, you'll want to take that off and replace it. And if you leave it pitted, it'll make a really bad growl sound. So definitely inspect your race there. Now we like to pack some grease in between all of these rollers that are on the bearing here, and get it greased up really good. Also do a swipe around the inside, and then you can put it back onto the race. I already have my other side greased, which you can see the grease there. So then we're ready to put the cover on, like so. It will roll around there, and it rolls nice with the grease inside those bearings. On my armature, I was careful to get this dry so it doesn't have any grease on it. And then I did put a little bit of grease down inside here, but not very much, just a little tiny bit. And then we can slide this into the case, just like that. And then our cover is ready to go on. Notice that I have one hole at the top and then this wider hole down at the bottom. And we'll line up our holes and set our screws in. They didn't have that type of lock washer behind them, so we'll put those all back on all the way around here. Just like that. I like to put my insulator on the end of the points before inserting it into the tractor. So there's a screw that reaches around to the other side, and you can see that there's the lip on the end of your insulator. And then once that's on, you can drop it down into the cap here. That'll slide in where the wedge is, and then you can wrap around the other side and put the points onto the post, and then you can push it down just like that. Notice on the side, you'll want to double check and make sure that nothing is touching so that you don't have any shorts if that insulator is touching the side. Now we're ready to set the gap on our points. You can notice that our lobe is up right here, and that's the position that you want your lobe to be in when you set the points. Now notice when I tighten this up with a screwdriver, that moves, which we don't want. So I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit so that I could still adjust it slightly. Now here's my gauge, and it's kind of loose, so I'm just going to move it. Can slide it over a little bit, and then I'm going to test it. That's very good. Now I'm going to try to tighten it up without moving it. Looks like I moved it a little bit. And move it back. Retest it. That's really good. And then I'll tighten it up. Now when you purchase this kit with your points, it'll sometimes come with the gauge for you, which would be 20 thousandths. My preference is to have that a little bit tighter. We're setting this to 15 thousandths today. You could probably do anywhere between 12 and 15, whatever your preference is. But tighten that up and then you'll be all set. It's important to use the core from your old coil, because when you purchase the brand new coil, it doesn't come with the core inside. So you can take your core out and you can see that my coil started to peel apart, and that's normal, it's okay. So I just will drive that through. You can clamp this in a vise if you need to, and take your old coil out and reuse it. Here I have my used coil that will slide, or a used core that will slide into the new coil like that. Sometimes it'll slide in harder. And then I have my insulator on each end. You can see that the circle clears the core. I'm going to put insulator on this end too. The tabs on the bottom of the insulator are inward, and I've got my wire up here. So this will slide down like this. You can see that my tab will wrap around the outside here, and then my wire is ready to insert down. We're going to put a brand new condenser in. So this will slide through, and then when we get down here, remember it has to have both wires on it, from this wire from the coil, and then the wire that drops down and connects where the points are. So we got that one through. Just going to grab this one with some pliers, hold the condenser still, and get the wire connection there. And then it will slide through here. Needs to go down a little bit. There we go. Now my condenser is over all the way, which is important that it's this way. I'm going to hold it there with this special kind of bolt. Turn it this way. And get that started like that. And then over here on this side, remember we had this screw that has that lock on it, which is important to drop all the way down in there, just like that. It's going to go through the hole, and then we'll tighten it up. We'll put our cover back on here with the new gasket underneath there, and then there's 2 screws with the washer behind them that will just get started here like that, and then we'll be ready to put our cap up on the top. It's not the right screwdriver. Here we go. Tighten both of these down real quick, and then we'll put the cap on. Now on the top of your coil, you want to make sure that you're able to make contact. See, this at the top is going to make contact in the cap, or the cover, which you can see there is where it will make contact. And then also we have our new gasket inside the lid here. So we'll flip that over, and it'll rest down like that. And then we'll just put our 4 screws in here. It's important to put your key back in. So I'll set that there, and we'll just make sure that it's really tightly pressed in there. It is. Okay, then we will put this over top, lining up that key. The key's up here towards me, just like that. It's perfect. Okay, then our new assembly, you see this notch lines up with this notch here. So it'll drop down in there. Oops, let me take that off and try again. Got our little collar in there. There we go. That's good. Okay, now again you can see that notch from the key is still following through, and this washer has a small little lip on it, which has to line up in there. It feels like this needs to go down further. Maybe not. Like that. Then we put our lock washer on, and then lastly our nut. We'll hold that all together. Tighten that up. Tighten this up here, and then I'll use an impact just to make sure it's really tight on there. You can see that my Magneto is back onto the tractor. I'll talk about some things that I did. Remember, the rotor was especially important where you had the electrode pointing at the #1 cylinder when we took it off, so we put it back the same way. We had all of our wires numbered, so we were able to follow the pattern from the old cap to put them back onto the new cap in the right order. You'll see that we have our ground connected. There's a gasket here that we put in. We'll start up the tractor and hear it run, and you can do the same. If your tractor needs any timing adjustments, then you would do that by physically moving the magneto, which these bolts here you can loosen up, and it will allow you to move the magneto so that it will labor or run a little easier. And then you can tighten up those bolts when you have it timed properly to the way that you want it timed. So let's start the tractor and hear it run. Very good. Love it. Okay, that's good. It sounds good. I'm not going to make any adjustments to the timing. We're going to leave that as is. I hope that this tutorial is helpful to you so that you can rebuild the magneto on your own tractor. If you would like to watch other tutorials, you can do so at steinertractor.tv.